Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 99 of Russian aggression in Ukraine, and this is the second week of January 2024. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about latest updates from the Kherson region, and we're going to talk about how Ukraine shut down one of the most expensive and most important Russian planes, A-50. Updates from the front lines. Intense situation in Krinky village in the Kherson region continues. A lot of news come from there, although mostly from the Russian sources because they complain about what is happening here constantly. So, judging by the reports of these Russian military, most popular military bloggers, they say with one voice that the things are going very, very badly for them in the area of settlement of Krinky in the Kherson region. This village is located on a left bank of the Dnipro River. As you remember, a few months ago, Ukrainian forces moved a few brigades to the other side of the river to attack Russian positions. So, if you remember, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to buy the enemy's bridgehead last year, and this bridgehead has been controlled by Ukrainians ever since. One of the Russian commanders wrote in his post, Krinky situation is worse than hell. So the Russian army is losing a lot of people in the Krinky district now, and not for military reasons, but for political reasons as well. The command of the armed forces of Russia is trying to throw the Ukrainian bridgehead into the Dnipro River out of all its might, since Vladimir Putin himself personally set the corresponding task for these generals during the live broadcast about a month ago. And since then, they saw and heard all this. They cannot but fulfill this order, and therefore they are forced to make all the possible and impossible efforts to take the village. And to accomplish this, Russians sent as many people as possible. At the same time, it is interesting to remember that Putin, when talking about this bridgehead, said that Ukraine is losing a lot of people in this village, and this is a real disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine, and that Russia is only suffering sanitary losses there. That is, it means some lightly wounded people, and that for Russia, this doesn't constitute any problems at all. But for Ukraine, it is a massacre. Well, for example, Putin first ordered that this bridge had not to be destroyed, and then he said, well, we will finish it all quickly now, because you should not think that this bridgehead will not last long. So, as you notice, this is a contradiction. And now, more than a month has passed since the day of the direct line of December 14th, but the problem in the form of the Ukrainian bridgehead is still in place and has ever become steeper. Why, why, is, why is that? Well, because Ukrainians are constantly digging in there. Every infantryman knows that any free time should be developed to digging and improving what has already been dug, because sooner or later your trench turn into your trench, a dig out, and so on will definitely save your life. So Ukrainians are digging in the Krinky village. That is, their fortifications will become more and more serious, and the real underground fortress has already been built there. And Putin has elections soon, as you remember, in March. He needs to demonstrate some results to the subject that he is a great commander, and he's as a commander leading his victorious armies. And here, of course, they cannot take Krinky village. They do not produce a victorious commander. So he tears up the mosque and demand that the bridgehead should be or must be destroyed. The generals are throwing new and new units at the Krinky, in fact, to certain death, because the Ukrainian artillery has shot everything there. Ukrainian drone operators completely control the air, and Ukrainian drones are buzzing everywhere. So even a mouse will not slip by unnoticed, and even more so, a Russian military unit will not pass unnoticed. It is impossible for a single Russian soldier to escape, well, maybe one or two who try to attack. Another Russian telegram channel, which is already run directly by Russian Marines from Sevastopol in Crimea, says 2 days ago, the second company of the amphibious assault battalion of the 101st 801st Brigade of the Russian Marines received an important symbolic task to install the Russian flag in the center of village Krynki. If little more time has spent and they wrote, the flag stood for only one time. It was a showy task of a command. There is no need to talk about taking control of the settlement. Heavy battles are going on. Well, to put it simply, the Russian command buried an entire company of Marines to set up a flag that stood there for less than an hour. As you can see, the installation of the flag is a political story, not a military one. But the Marines who tried to go there to fight to install this flag died. Actually, that's why there is a hell. And that's why the Russian Federation continues to suffer not sanitary, but a very real and rather high losses in Krinky village. One of the Russian soldiers wrote to the Russian military commander Romanov, who later published this message. Brother, this is a nightmare we've never seen before. I'm talking about the situation in Krinky, where a consolidated company of Marines was thrown into the assault. I was in this company. We were simply blown to dust there. Drones monitored us from above all the time and directed fire precisely at the infantry. I'm only after the restoration, and I don't mind the knocking of Ukrainians. It's long part time to move them into the river, but not like this. Without operational fire support, it's just a bloody mess. As far as it's possible to judge from the reports of the Russian mass media and the military forces, this meat grinder in Krinky village has been going on for several days. So, a very big news and successful attack on most expensive Russian military plane A-50 was shocking the world. Ukraine said it had shot down a Russian spy plane and badly damaged a second over the Sea of Azov region. So, Kirill Budanov, Ukraine's chief of military intelligence, told on Monday that Ukrainian forces had managed to destroy the Russian A-50 plane and damage the Il-22 plane. The A-50 was shot down and it exploded, he said. The Il-22 was badly damaged, but unfortunately for Ukraine, it managed to make an emergency landing in Crimea. Budanov added during the interview in added this information during his interview in his Kyiv office. Early on Monday, Ukraine's commander-in-chief of the armed forces Valery Zaluzhny wrote on Telegram that soldiers of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine destroyed the enemy A-50 long-range radar detection aircraft and the Il-22 airborne command post of the enemy. He, sh- he shared a clip from a radar screen that appears to show the planes disappearing off the sea and thanked the Air Forces for excellently planned and conducted operation in Azov region. The strike of the two command and control aircraft represent a significant boost to Ukraine's counteroffensive nearly 2 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion. These sophisticated surveillance planes are key to Russian coordination of ground operations. So, Mykola Lyshuk, Ukraine's Air Force commander, also confirmed the attacks, writing that this is for Dnipro. Burn in hell, you bastards, referring to the recent Russian airstrikes on the southeastern city. So, Ukraine defense sources said that A-50, an airborne early warning and control jet, was shot down shortly after takeoff near Kirillivka village, a coastal town on the northern Azov coast in the occupied region of Zaporizhia. So, Ukraine's military didn't say what was used to strike the planes, and it has a few domestically produced air defense systems capable of the attack. But since it received US made Patriot air defense system last year, Ukraine has waged a more effective campaign against the Russian aircraft. So, what can the A-50 do and why it's so important? So, for example, if one looks at the coverage of a ground-based radar stationed near Yevpatoria of the Crimea Peninsula, one of the two centers of Russian air defense systems in the peninsula, one can notice that due to the features of the terrain and even when placed on a 50-meter high mast, this radar cannot detect objects approaching from the north and heights at less than 20 meters, the green zone, 100 meters yellow zone, and has very limited detection capabilities even against objects approaching from the north at a height of up 500 meters, which is orange zone. So he will be able to detect in time only objects approaching from the north and operating at heights of more than 500 meters. So the air defense has time to react. So the A-50 jet received a relatively powerful radar, but it still suffered from interference from the ground, since the processors and software used to support this radar were not good enough to completely clear it. Its communication equipment lagged behind, most of the means of electronic warfare were missing, etc. Only in 1990s and 2000s the Russians gradually introduced some improvements. In the end, this led to a serious modernization in the form of the Jet A-50U, on which new processors were installed. Thus, the aircraft could be effectively used not only over the sea, but also over the land. So, what actually happened on January 14th, 2024 over the Azov Sea? And what the strategy Ukrainians used to shut down the A-50 plane? On January 13, 2024, the Ukraine Air Forces launched a series of airstrikes against the Russian ground radar and air defense systems on the occupied Crimean Peninsula. Several radars were disabled. As a result, the Russians ordered one of the few A-50 jets to fly into the air, and as usual, in addition to the aircraft with insufficient equipment for the task, it was accompanied by another jet, Il-22M Air Command Post, and also probably Il-20M electronic warfare aircraft. So, the problem that the range of the A-50 radar was too short to detect approaching Ukrainian aircraft and missiles from a sufficient distance. Thus, the aircraft had to operate very close to the front line, only 80-90 kilometers from it, so it's approximately 50 miles. So, in itself, this is not a problem, at least until there were no longer range Ukrainian anti aircraft missiles. On January 13, 2024, Ukrainian airstrikes not only forced the Russian super smart generals to order the A-50U and Il-22M jets closer to the front line. But at the same time, the Russian Air Force also carried out their own airstrikes. As usual, these two aircraft were accompanied by at least or a couple of fighter jets Su-30 interceptors. In addition, Su-34 fired Kh-59 precision-guided munitions at the targets on the territory of Ukraine. So Russia's activity attracted a lot of attention from the West. It certainly helped the Ukrainians' planning of subsequent operations. It is further known that the crew of one of the fighter jets, Su-34, reported that its own electronic warfare systems detected the radar radiation of one of the Ukrainian S-300 complexes, the existence of which was previously unknown. A few minutes later, the A-50 plane, accompanied by Il-22, were fired upon by surface-to-air missiles. So A-50 was shot down, set on fire, and fell into the swamps south of Preslav, probably losing the entire crew. A missile aimed at the Il-20 plane went off near the target, leaving it with fragments. According to the reports of Russian social media, at least two crew members were killed, two more were injured, and one of them in a critical condition. However, the crew managed to drive the badly damaged plane back to the Anapa airport and landed safely. How could it happen, and what can be said about the methods that the Ukrainians used to achieve some these impressive success? Although it's obvious that it was an ambush, one or two air defense systems of Ukraine armed forces were operating in assault mode. Some suggest that the Ukrainians deployed one of their Franken SAMs, something like Patriot missiles paired with S-300 systems. The Ukrainian airstrikes against Russian air defense systems on the occupied Crimea Peninsula on January 13 forced the Russians to react as the Ukrainians expected. A day later, on January 14th, they moved the A-50 jet closer to the front line. When someone behaves predictably, it is easy to ambush him and kill him. So now all the Ukrainians had to do was secretly deploy an air defense system suitable for defeating two aircrafts from a long distance. Perhaps it was one of the S-300 air defense systems, or perhaps one of the PAC-2 air defense systems. It is also possible that Ukrainians deployed the launcher and the radar of one of the three PAC-2 third air defense systems in assault mode, which is described in details about a year ago, and in combination with other systems S-300. As soon as S-300 radar detected suitable targets, it transmitted their azimuth and range to the PAC-2 third air defense system. The latter turned on its radar for just a few seconds, long enough to get its own data on the target, but too short for the Russians to reliably detect its radiation and assess it as a threat. And then the Ukrainians started launching their missiles. How much? It's really hard to tell, but I would say it's quite possible that some of them worked in the home on jam mode. They were guided by the radiation of the electronic warfare equipment of Russian aircraft. After the end of the fire, the Ukrainian S-300 and PAC-2 third crews immediately stopped the radiation and began to collect their systems to move them further and thus avoid possible Russian retaliation. Meanwhile, moving away from the launch point for 920 kilometers, the missiles destroyed the A-50U and damaged the other Il-22M plane. Well, I would say this was one of the most successful Ukrainian attacks on Russian aviation after the last month Ukraine damaged the naval ship of Russians. Well, the military operations of the last month show the West if Ukraine had enough modern weapons, the Russian forces could be defeated in a matter of 1 year. So, glory to Ukrainians for defending our land from the terrorist state. If you like my podcast, please share with your friends.